Welcome everyone. We're back for another session of Build with Ben. And so for this week, one of the things I wanted to talk about is about edge functions. So if you haven't heard, Netlify recently released their offering for Netlify Edge Functions. So it's a hot topic, honestly. It's not just a Netlify thing. There's a lot of different cloud providers and sort of deployment services starting to talk about this. And so since this is a, fairly hot topic at the moment, and more importantly, I think it's becoming more and more relevant to developers these days, I thought we'd spend this session, one, talking a little bit about what it is, why it's important, and then play around with it, see how it impacts the developer experience. And then what we're going to try to do actually is also integrate that inside of a Vue app. This should be fun. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and just switch over and let's dive right in, shall we? All right, so first thing first, the question here is, what is edge functions, right? So basically the way to think about edge functions, at least sort of like the TLDR, the way I like to think about it is, most of the time when you have a website, right, and you're going to hit something, so if we're going to go hit the Vue 3 website, for example, what's going on is that we're making requests from where we are. So I'm making a request, for example, from like the West Coast of the United States, and I'm going to a server somewhere to request a page, and then that thing is sending it back to me. And so this is how basically websites, at its simplest models, that's all that's happening. And so when it comes to things like performance, and we're talking about application deployment and all these things, over time we've evolved like our approach to it, right? Because let's say back then, right, when the web was in its infancy, there was sort of like basically like think of it like one central server you can imagine that controlled everything in the US, right? Let's say for the sake of argument, it was in the middle of the US. Let's say it was in Texas. It was in Austin, Texas. One server. Well, over time we got a little bit more sophisticated, right? Because, well, we want to serve, basically information to users faster over the network. And so the way we do that is what? You can increase speed, but really the thing you want to minimize is distance. So then there was this idea of like Cdn caches, right? So CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And basically at a high level, what that allowed us to do was basically allowed us to put other servers near users to make it faster to basically send it out. So you would have your main server in Austin in this sort of simplistic model that like generated all the content, and it would go and store basically these cache sites on these different CDNs that were around the world. So there might be one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast of the US. Then there might be a CDN in Asia, one in Europe, etc. Then we grow that one step further, right? Because it's one thing to kind of get a general location of where a user is, but it's another to go even closer, right? What if you could be as close as, for example, the city that they're in? And so certainly there are a lot of things to help basically developers discover those things. But the reason why edge functions, and this is why it's called at the edge, right? Because you're technically as close, at least at this point, you're basically as close to the user as humanly possible from like a server perspective. And the reason that's interesting is because, well, up until this point, it really hasn't been available to users. This is by users, I mean developers, because this is usually more of an enterprise thing, right? Especially back then when we were managing our own server racks and those sort of things, it's really expensive to set up a location to manage availability of your website or your application across basically the entire world. But now, especially with cloud computing and serverless and all these things, now things are, well, they're different. And especially as they've gotten a lot cheaper and the availability of it is increased, now all of a sudden we as developers can leverage that, even though we might not have enterprise level licenses and those sort of things. This kind of stuff is starting to be accessible to us. And that's ultimately what's super exciting. So, okay, let's see. I see some stuff in the chat. Okay. Yes, Jimena, fantastic. We will definitely catch up. Improcrates here. Oh, I'm sorry you can't watch now. But as far as how long so I plan on streaming roughly 90 minutes, give or take. I have a call actually afterwards I need to hop onto. But yeah, I'll be here for over an hour. So if you get a chance to hop back on, be sure to come on by. I see 503 here in the chat. All right. Well. Yes, I'm gonna hear it's a new setup. Yeah, actually, we can talk more about that. But yeah, here on the West Coast now, so things are a little bit different. Hopefully, we have some decorations and stuff up in the meantime. So anyhow, that's like the high level of, I would say, edge functions, like at its simplest. I think I would like to eventually create some infograph and stuff to showcase that. But basically, in my opinion, it's not so much that edge functions are like a new technology from the sense that like this has existed. It's just now it's available to developers to think about and use. And so basically it allows us to basically offload some of the performance stuff, because a lot of performance when we talk about like, websites, they're talking about like minimizing, your image sizes in JavaScript. And there's certainly reason to do a lot of that. But there comes a point where if you can offload some of that performance stuff straight up to the server, where rather than having to traverse your data from one endpoint to another, and just like at the closest point to the user, get the information you need and return the most relevant information to the user, that's really where we can save like basically, I call it meaningless computing, where you have to like send an entire page load down, like sort of payload down into a page, then have the JavaScript go and fetch something to go check something, and then come back and change the page. Like, what if we could just do that at the very beginning? So then JavaScript can still do what it's really good at, which is like doing a bunch of dynamic stuff with the page, but all that payload stuff is already done up front, right? That's where you can really get a lot of performance improvements as a result. So with that said, what are we here to do today? Well, I figured we'd go ahead and take a look at some of the examples of what edge functions are, just to kind of further drill that in. But then on top of that, I want to see edge functions within the framework context. So no surprise to anyone, I'll be doing it within the Vue 3 context, but I figured this will give us a good sort of discussion point, and we'll just sort of get to explore and see what it's like to use Netlify edge functions with Vue 3. So I see here in the chat, Weavedale, would you put Prisma in the edge function to get your data from the database? Gosh, this is a great question. I mean, as far as examples, you know what? Actually, this might be a good time to just open up the example site. So in case you're looking for examples of how the edge function could be used, this is a phenomenal site that my coworkers Phil Huxworth and Salma, both of them had like basically worked on this. It's phenomenal. So there's a bunch of examples here. But when it comes to putting like database requests and those sort of things, that's a little bit trickier, because in some regard you would think that like having the payload in advance might be really useful before it gets on, like basically before the user grabs everything from the page. On the other hand, if we take a look, there is a way to like, so for example, geolocation is one of the things that is often referenced with edge functions, and understandably so, right? Because if you can figure out someone's location, you might be able to help things like figure out, well, if this content isn't accessible to you in a given country, that can be done for you early on, rather than forcing users to download an entire page to then run all the JavaScript to then figure out, oops, sorry, you're in the wrong location, we can't serve this. And you might be thinking like, Ben, why does that matter? Well, the thing is that, well, I'll speak specifically from my experience as someone who lives in the United States. We are from what I understand, we are very spoiled when it comes to internet and data, because, well, largely speaking, we don't pay for the data that we use. The rest of the world, from what I understand, is quite different. They're paying for the amount of data that they use. So if they have to download megabytes of JavaScript and et cetera, just to find out that they can't use the content, this is a problem. Not to mention the performance bottleneck. But if we could know in advance what country they were basically at least requesting the site from, right? Because obviously VPNs and stuff can throw that off. But in generally speaking, if we could know that, then we could help them out by saying, hey, look, I know you want to access this content, but it's not available to you. So this is an example here that they created. So as far as the database question, though, to make sure I address that, I wouldn't say it's like one of those things you want to necessarily serve at the edge or not. I think it's going to depend on your use case, because there's certainly something to be said about how much of the performance is worth offloading to the back as far as like the server side. Especially for things, especially if you're requesting sort of like live data. Like imagine if you're building a site that has like sort of like a Google Doc interface where there's a lot of live collaboration. It might not really make sense to like offload that ahead of time. But things that might make a lot of sense is like authentication, for example, right? We were talking about blocking content. Well, this was like a location-based content that we referenced earlier. But in this case, imagine like if we could actually, based on whether a cookie from like exists on the site, and then check basically against the authentication database, and then from that return the right response. That is something that would actually make a lot of sense to do in advance, because I mean, how many of us have dealt with the fact of like loading a website, and then like because we're not authenticated, there's like this weird blinking thing that happens, and then maybe 10-15 seconds go by before we figure out what's going on. So whereas like if we could just immediately get that payload that's like, oops, you're not authenticated, time to move on. This is how I think a lot of people are seeing those performance improvements when it comes to using things like edge functions. I see Nunchi here in the chat. Hello, what's up? Yeah, so Weavedale, hopefully that helps to give like a high level explainer. I would say for the most part, especially if you're talking about database stuff, depending on how static the data is and if you're trying to like customize the page, edge functions could be good. But if you don't need, if you don't need everything to be at the edge. So if you don't need all these like rewrites and this sort of stuff, there's something to be said also for maybe something like on-demand builders instead. So that's also known as incremental static generation. Anyways, I'm messing all the terminology up. But basically, if you want to server-side render some of those things, if you feel like that would help solve a problem from like your user's perspective, that is another approach that's worth considering. But I would say though, at least I'll throw the controversial opinion out there. I know that right now, especially in the front end world, there's a lot of hype around server-side rendering, right? So basically, let me see if there's actually server-side rendering. Let me see if there's like a diagram that I can use real quick. Great. Yeah, let's use this one. Give me just the image. Open image, a new tab. Excellent. Okay. So like basically server-side rendering is the idea that like we do everything on the server, which is honestly, it's basically the old way used to be things to be done anyways. It generates the HTML, that's what's served, that's what happens, right? The complete opposite, just for clarification, in case anyone's new to it, is just client-side rendering, which is the server gives very little, and then the browser and then the JavaScript is responsible for everything that happens. So basically they're polar opposites of each other. So my call it like hot take when it comes to SSR, while I know it's very popular right now, is that I really do ask the question, is it really necessary for your app? I think one of the problems that I seem to see when it comes to the topic of performance with web is that as engineers, we're honestly usually trying to squeeze every single millisecond that we can out of it. So when it seems like we're like, oh, well, we're able to cut this rendering time from 50 milliseconds to 25 milliseconds, that's a 50% savings. But then you also have to ask yourself, is that 25 milliseconds actually making a perceptible difference to the end user? And what I mean by that is if you can detect different behavior from your user as a result of that work, that to me is very different. But I think one of the, I don't know, call it like foot guns that I often see with engineers is that we often try to create these like perfect, we're looking for like the 100% completionist role of like, hey, we optimize every single thing possible, when the truth is there are always trade-offs in the decisions that we make. So when we spend a lot of time trying to figure out things like SSR, but that's not really the problem, because SSR won't solve the problem of your editors who are managing the content on your site uploading 50 megabyte GIFs. Like, it is important to figure out where the problem is and what problem you're trying to solve, rather than merely going, well, with SSR, this means that performance will improve. Like, okay, but do you actually have that performance issue, right? Is that what your app is having problems with? By all means, if you figure out that SSR would solve your problem, that's great. But again, I think chasing principles for the sake of chasing principles, of having the fastest for the sake of having the fastest, that I think is one of our Achilles heels when it comes to developing solutions and architectures. And so anyhow, that's like my small hot take when it comes to this sort of stuff. So, all right. That said, let's just start playing around with some code, shall we? So first thing first, we have this Edge Functions example site, which is built entirely, as you would hope, using Edge Functions. So let's go and open this up in the source code real quick and just kind of take a look. So first thing first, what we'll see here when we check package.json, just to show you and prove to you that this is how it works, there are no frameworks in this. This is entirely done using just Netlify to deploy everything at the edge. So basically what we see, what's happening here is there are a bunch of pages here. So let's put this side by side so we can see the example, shall we? All right. So here's the Edge Functions page, and let's do the geolocation. Let's do the Hello World one just for the sake of like having things be easily tracked. All right, here's Hello World. Great. So how is this built as of right now in the Edge function example repo? So what we see here is that inside of pages, we have this hello right here. And here we go. This is the index.js. Now what you can see here, this is basically exporting an object that's going to be rendered onto the page. As far as you see this h1 and basically whatever's on the page. This is basically using JavaScript to render it out. But what's ultimately happening though, if we go back into the example, is that we have inside of our Netlify Edge Functions folder, we have this hello.js. And this here is where actually the function is being executed and where it's being housed. And then the other component to edge functions at the moment is you need to actually configure when you want the edge function to actually be called, basically determine the path. So we see here there's a bunch of different edge functions, little like parameters here. So in this case, if we just look for hello, you'll see here that if we go to the path hello, this is the edge function that will execute. That's basically all that's happening. So let's go ahead and do a more complex one, shall we? Let's go ahead and take a look at the determining a user's location. So you can see here that it's saying that, oh, I'm in the United States. And so for here, let's see exactly how this works. So if we go back inside of the pages here, geolocation, great. So we can see here the geolocation info is being generated there. Let's see, Okay, makes sense. It is in components. Why is it in the components? Let's see. Geolocation info. Ah, yes, here we go. And so it's executing the geolocation city country code. But when we take a look at the edge functions here, there we go. Okay, so this is the code we're seeing on the right-hand side, right? This is what's actually being executed. So we can see here that you're making a request, you have a context, and then you can return a JSON object that returns like the geo as well as the headers. Okay, fairly straightforward. So the question here is, how do we integrate this into like a full-blown Vue app, right? Because right now these are isolated examples in their own silos. And so I wanted to see what would happen if we ported this over into Vue. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? First thing first, I've gone ahead and created a repo for this already. So if you're looking to eventually follow along, let's see, I think Vue 3 Edge Functions. There we go, Edge Function examples. So this is what I'll be basically coding in. Drop that in the chat if that actually worked. Copy. That does not work for some reason. There we go. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and jump right in, shall we? All right, so here we have our edge function examples. So all I have here is a standard Vue 3 app that's scaffolded with Vite. So if I run npm run dev, we'll see here that is working here inside. And so all I have is really the hello world up. And let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to make this work. So first thing first, off the top of my head, is we're going to need the router. That's definitely going to be a thing. But I guess let's start with the homepage, shall we? So the homepage here, let's go ahead and take a look. If we go ahead, let's see, view the source code. Let's duplicate this site because I want to be able to show how Edge Functions works with Vue. This is how to deploy the site. That's fine. Pages, public. Okay, interesting. Do we have some CSS? We do have some styles. We have some style CSS. Excellent. This will make it easier for my life. So I'm just going to grab all this. And we're going to grab that. And let's go ahead and just drop this inside of the style tag for the app. There we go. And then the other thing now, let's go ahead and check the pages for the, oh, hello. Oh, no. I want the actually home page. So where is the home page? Public, lib. This is the library, highlight, min, image. These are images, components. Where is my index.js? Pages home index.js. Okay, sure enough. All right, so if we grab this and let's see, this is a bunch of different things in here. Great. Let's just see if this works to begin with. So we'll grab that, swap all this out, save. Let's see. Oh, okay. So the zoom is a little bit aggressive on this. I'm going to jump this out a little bit. If you have trouble reading, let me know. But otherwise, let's go ahead and, okay, so I do have the thing running. Okay, great. So we have high level here. It looks like the basic content is showing up. Now my question here is, it looks a little bit different. And my guess is because the header, I'm missing some things on the header side of things. So header, yep. So there's a header component. So we're gonna go ahead and do that here. So we'll just go ahead, clear. I'm gonna say the header. So one of the things I try to do when naming components in Vue 3 is really to avoid naming things that will have conflicts with potential HTML5 standards. So the header being that there's really only one header on the page, and therefore signifying that it's unique. So okay, there you go, that's the header. And so then we can go ahead, let's see, let me hide the terminal, let me hide the bookmark so it's easier to read. And inside of here now, we can just import the header from here, and then we should be able to drop it here, just like that. And there you go, that's looking better. Okay, interesting, we have the title here is clearly a dynamic thing. We're missing some more stuff though, because it looks like we're missing some header things in order to, oh wait, not header, we're missing the head things. Because what we want to do here is, yep, there's a bunch of char set stuff. So let me go ahead and grab all this real quick. We will parse that stuff later. And we just drop this here inside of the head tag. So if I save that, this should already look better. It does. Excellent. The only thing I need to do though is I need to figure out why this thing is wrapped. It's a wrap around a main class main. Very good. We can do that. So all we got to do is collapse. Oh, we got to collapse. Oh, gosh, this is a lot. Okay, so all we got to do is take all this, all of these sections here. I meant to use the wrap and main.main. And if I save that now, this looks much closer. Excellent. We have the examples. Now we're only missing one more thing. We're missing the edge functions on Netlify, and then we're pretty close to having everything we need. Here's the layout. What are edge functions? So here we go. So now we come up here, and then I drop that here. What are edge functions? Looking good. We just need one more thing. We just need the edge function piece. Header, layout, repo link. I guess, what are edge functions? Okay, so at this point, I'm honestly just going to create a new window because it's getting a little harder to search in that. So I believe I should already have, oh, I don't have it cloned already. We shall clone it then. We shall clone all the things. Edge function example. Code, excellent. All right, git clone. Oh, I do already have it. I just haven't opened up VS Code. That's fine. Okay. So if we go ahead and take a look, we need to look for what are edge functions. This is in layout. How did I miss that? Anyways, no matter. So we have another section here for an explainer. All right, just like that. And then what are edge functions? No, wait, I did do that then. Netlify Edge Functions using TypeScript. Yeah, this is a duplicate. That's a duplicate. Refresh, undo, or save, refresh, undo, save, refresh. Okay, examples. It looks better, but I'm missing, this is bothering me a little bit. Explore a library, maybe that's what I need to look for. So if I take a look here and I did explore a library, that is, oh, that's being, oh, interesting. There's like, it's like a little section here that I did not expect. Okay, so if I drop that there, will that do it? Hey, there we go. And we have what is essentially a carbon copy of the two. Some slight padding things it looks like, but minor. All right, great. We have the home page, and now we need to figure out how we actually integrate the edge functions in. That took a little bit. Okay, so let me go ahead and create a new terminal here. All right, index.view. We'll break everything out either later on. So add home page. Great. Now what we want to do is test out these functions and figure out how the heck they work. So first thing first, we're going to go ahead and as always, let's start simple. Let's start with the hello world. So inside of here, we should have basically a Netlify folder. Inside of our Netlify folder, we will have edge functions. Inside of this edge functions, then we will have the hello. I prefer to call this hello world.js just because it's a little bit more explicit. And then let's just drop that in. Okay, so theoretically now, what we should see is we should now, what should we do? We should then go to Netlify toml, and then I will delete all this stuff because we're not going to worry about that. We don't need to worry about this. This is our toml. Great. All right. So if we do edge, what was it called? Open up the other one. This one, yes, edge function. That was right. Okay. So edge underscore functions. Then we say the function that we want to run is going to be hello world, and it's going to be run at the path. Interesting. So it is run at, looks like set request, set header. Oh, okay, I see. Then they're at specific paths. Okay, let's just run hello world only on the home page for now. Let's just see what happens. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run nettle dev. And what this will do is just like, so if you haven't worked with serverless functions before, usually it's a bit of a hassle because you have to configure like a server to replicate the thing, yada, yada. Anyways, just like serverless functions with Netlify, with the Netlify CLI, you can basically run them locally to test them out without having to go out and set up like basically a serverless instance of like AWS and et cetera, et cetera. It just works locally, which is fantastic. So would you like configure code to use VS functions, use edge functions? Absolutely. New VS codes will be, settings will be created? Sure. All right. So, okay. So this did a couple of things. What it looks like happened is that we actually, actually the edge function worked, and as we can see here, because we see the hello world. And we can verify this by going into hello world, and we can modify this to say hello Twitch, and then save it. And so now you'll see down here on the bottom that Netlify is actually reloading it. And now when we reload the function, it's actually pulling in the right content. That was pretty easy. The only thing though, which you might have noticed, is that, well, the page is gone. Womp womp. So since the page is gone, this leads me to believe then what's happening, like this is a great way of illustrating that when you're requesting something normally from like the server, Vue will just populate like that homepage that we have, this app.vue. But because we're at an edge function now, the edge function, what it essentially does is it intercepts that traffic. It says, hey, by the way, you've requested this homepage, and then you jump down the service. And then right when you get to the very end, we've intercepted it to say, hey, by the way, when you're at this specific path, in this case, the homepage, I want you to respond with this specific response, which happens to be this response of like, hey, this is going to be some text on the page, and we're going to basically say hello Twitch. That's all it's going to do. Which in other words, it's saying that it's overriding what we've done on the client side. So how might we integrate this together then? Well, I think the hello world example then has to be done, at least if you're planning on still using Vue to do all the rendering at this point, right? Let's say we want to render whatever message is coming from hello world. If that is the case, then what we need to be able to do then is basically call it. And that's what's kind of interesting then, is because what we end up with, at least at this moment, is you end up, like, at least at the moment, my mental model is treating edge functions a little bit like serverless functions with more context. That it has the ability to rewrite all of the HTML. So in that regard, I wonder, well, this will be part of our exploration, shall we? We need to figure out how we can integrate the two so that it's not merely just calling it. So for example, let's just show the basic paradigm of what happens when they're separate. So right now we go inside of Netlify toml, and instead I'll do API/hello world, right? This will be the path where the response is being intercepted. Then if this works the way I think it should, and we refresh, you'll see that our homepage is back as we would expect. But the difference here now is that if we gone ahead and let's say inside of script setup, we would go ahead and do a fetch call, right? And we fetch /API/hello world. Then what we should do is we should get a function with the response, and let's go ahead and just log the response. Keep it nice and simple. So we'll notice that, whoop, there's something not like it. Oh, it did not like it. What did it not like? Oh, it's saying that these resources cannot be found. Well, that makes sense. Let me go ahead and fix that real quick. It's saying styles.css does not exist, which makes sense because I just basically dropped it in there. And then one more, we need to drop the highlight min. Yep, that's gone. Bye-bye. And then, oh yes, highlight all. We're not even gonna worry about that. That's gone. Bye-bye. And then I might as well update these configurations real quick. And then the title here, view 3 edge functions examples, save. Okay, great. Last thing we need is clearly the manifest JSON to go bye-bye. We technically don't have any icons right now, so I'm just wiping those out real quick. Okay, now we're good. The only thing though is that the fetch did not do anything here as far as I can tell. So if we, oh, wait, here it is. API hello world, great. What do we get from our response? We got hello Twitch. So what we could do, for example, is if we did a const, let's call it a hello response, and this will be a ref. Can I automatically import? Perfect. Import, this is an empty string. So to show that this works, we're gonna go ahead and just drop this right below here and just do hello response. So you see empty string right there. But rather than merely doing that, we're going to go ahead and say that the hello response dot values equal to response. Let's see what happens now. So if we save and refresh, we'll notice that nothing's happening. Interesting. Hello world is requested here. Hello world response. Oh, I see Wingmat here in the chat. Hello. Agreed on the mental model. I'm new to Edge functions and wondering how much extra context they have versus regular serverless functions. Yeah, so Wingmat, to answer your question, the main thing is that, let's actually, again, the easiest thing is definitely to show the docs for this. Edge function Netlify docs. So as far as the API is concerned, whoa, okay. Figure that out. Okay. So basically you get this context object. And the reason why the context object is super nice is because you get to basically access a bunch of new functionality that might not have been available to you otherwise. So things like being able to read cookies from the site or like the browser, and then being able to get things like the geolocation, being able to actually do invoking a next edge function in the chain. So it's pretty nice in that basically it allows you to chain a bunch of stuff in advance before the page even arrives to the user. Now, granted, we're clearly not at that point right now, because what we're clearly seeing is that as of this moment, because it's overriding it entirely, it's kind of tricky to go, how would I utilize edge functions within a framework where I'm relying on the framework and all my components to do the thing? So basically what we're doing right now is trying to play around to see how the edge functions lives in that in-between state and how we can make that work. So let's continue playing along, shall we? Okay, so I clearly got a response here. Yep, API hello world, right? So if we copy this and drop this URL inside of the browser. Yeah, not a problem, Matt. Let me know if you have any other thoughts, questions. But as of this point, this is kind of like the in-between world we're living in. Yeah, hello Twitch is clearly happening. So what's happening here? Why is it just not, is the fetch not happening? Because, okay, so if I remove this, save it, we can clearly see hello world is not called at all. No question about it. But this is here, save. Nothing is being logged. And my guess is because it's being logged then on the server side. Nope, not appearing there. So that's not it either. Oh, did I mess something up? Let's reboot the server real quick. Yep. Loaded edge function, hello world, refresh. Okay, so that's interesting because we fetch from the API. There's clearly a response. But when I log, nothing happens. And when I try to update the value, nothing happens either. Okay. So is that because of the response? Let's see. So if we take a look at the example for hello world here. Let's see actually how this works internally. So we jump back over to here and we bump this over. And we look at the hello.js, right? We see that we have a new response. Oh. return. Nope. This is right. New response. Oh, content type text HTML. That might be the reason. That might actually very well be the reason. Because it's trying to return an HTML to the page rather than something that we can respond to. So what other content types is there? So headers, content type. So 0x now here, can you do all the things with edge functions that you can do with serverless? I wouldn't put them exactly in the same category. So the reason for this is because there are some limitations when it comes to edge functions. So some of the things we can see here is that there is a memory limit, and there is a very short CPU execution time. Whereas serverless functions, and this this kind of answers the first question from Weavedale a little bit when it comes to database requests. Because of these limits, typically you probably wouldn't use edge functions for something like requesting something from a database, because unless you have a really small payload and a really fast connection to your database, odds are you're probably going to run into one of these like limits at some point as far as like either runtime and those sort of things. So that's why even with serverless functions, and this is not just a Netlify thing, I think this is just a general architecture thing. Most serverless functions, I think, are engineered to, again, I'll just use the serverless one, Netlify one, because I'm familiar with them. They inherently have a limit of 10-second execution, right? 10 seconds is actually a decent amount of time when it comes to requesting stuff from the database. But secondly, then you also might have sometimes things that will run even longer. So as you can see, for things that might take 15 minutes, we have background functions. So I would say, generally speaking, when it comes to thinking about offloading your architectural responsibilities to serverless things, basically edge functions are like getting like the quickest thing possible. So in that regard, you're probably not going to be using it to call a bunch of things. However, you can use it as a basis to then call the right serverless functions that will run longer and then update your page. So it's one of those things where, like, I think if we're thinking of it as developers, we basically have the ability to say, okay, so if we want something where like the fastest bot possible to grab like user's location, to grab, things, basically to do really integral checks that, again, authentication, location. These are the easiest ones, at least, that come to top of mind. Edge functions is your best buddy. And then also, for example, if you're checking for cookies, so if you know that like certain cookies are going to mean certain things for your website, you could basically use cookies to check that in advance. Now, on the other hand, if you want to like now start fetching databases and those sort of things, edge functions, at least from what I see with the limitations and what I've worked with, not really, they're not suited for that job. That's when you go to serverless functions. So anyways, yeah. So that's something to consider. 0x now here. So we'll work to use edge functions as a proxy. So proxies are a thing as well in edge functions. So for those, let's go ahead and proxy request to another source. So as you can see here, inside of your edge functions, you are able to proxy things. And so basically, let me actually make sure I recap. For those that don't know what proxying is, it's basically saying that you're using this function to take place of another request. So it's basically serving as the middle function in the middle, like a middleware kind of thing to go do the thing and then bring it back. So clearly, as we can see here, you can request stuff within it. Clearly there's nothing wrong with that. But I would say that for the most part, especially because as edge functions, like people are figuring out pricing and those sort of things. Because again, I said it is accessible to developers. But one of the things, this will be like a side tangent, but relevant, is that for developers with working with serverless functions, if you're used to working with things, then like if you're used to working with static site generators, used to basically having everything being free, right? You're not really thinking about requests, because once you deploy your website as a static site, it's done. Like there's not really, most websites aren't necessarily tracking, unless you get like a ton of traffic, they're not really tracking like how many visits and hits you get. On the other hand, in the world of serverless functions, while it is significantly cheaper than it was before, like you don't have to be like a full running business to run this stuff, the reality is that there are limits when it comes to edge functions, serverless functions. Of most deployment services have some sort of like request limit where, so for example, right, let's just look at Netlify pricing. And so here we go. You can see here that, wait, I want the table. Where's the table? Here we go. So you can see here that with serverless functions, right, you have the ability to have 125,000 per site per month, and then after that you're paying for things. And so one of the trickier things I think for developers as they start playing around with this new stuff is if they're not careful about how things are going to be architected. So for example, if your entire site is going to be served using serverless functions because you're like, I'm going to SSR everything, right? And so serverless functions will build the thing. Well, you do run a slight risk that you will go past a bandwidth when it comes to your usage, especially if whatever robots are crawling it, or if you got unlucky and you got hit by a spam bot, these things happen. So cost needs to actually start being factored into things as people start, at least in my mind, as you start playing around with this stuff, just to know that, so even edge functions, right? Edge functions has their limits versus serverless functions. So I would say it's less about being able to do the thing and more about just making sure that it solves the right problem for you. And then especially if price and cost is a concern, then making sure that you keep an eye on your usage for those things. Because while a lot of us are very spoiled in being able to use a lot of things for free and for the most part unlimited, right? This is not necessarily the case at the moment when it comes to cloud computing. It's not gotten so cheap that people are basically giving people free reign to run them infinitely. So something to keep in mind. So 0x9, hopefully that helped to answer your question. But yeah, you can totally use a proxy to grab stuff. So my only thing though is that if this is the case, I mean, let's grab this one real quick. So yeah, this is what's kind of interesting to me. Is that because, wait, this is a request. It's not run. So new response. Yup, that should work. All right, let's do this real quick. What if let's do a new file. Let's call it dadjoke.js. Dad.js will take all of this. We are not in TypeScript, so we're deleting this. There we go. We don't need the type. Oh, is that why it's importing it? Okay. Great. Okay. So now when we refresh the site, everything should be fine. I noticed though, it hasn't detected the oh wait, I know why it hasn't detected it. Because we haven't configured it. So we're gonna have another edge function here. Actually, let's just copy this real quick. And then we'll replace hello world with dad joke. Yes. Dad joke, save. Okay, so we see dad joke has been loaded in the console. This is great. Again, this is all happening locally, which is awesome. So now if we go to API/dad joke, nothing happens. Oh, here we go. Okay, we got a response. So it went out, it fetched it. It said, hey, whenever the cashier at the grocery store asked my dad if he would like the milk in the bag, he replies, no, just leave it in the carton. Ha, 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 ha. Okay. So that's nice. But then the question is, how would I integrate that? So again, let's go ahead and ask the same question to see if it's somehow any different. If we go to app.view, and this time we're going to fetch, rather than this, we'll fetch from dad joke and save it. Well, let's see. Nothing in the console, clearly. Network did get dad joke. That's fine. So dad joke did get a thing. Response is this object. But for whatever reason, it's not showing up in... Oh. I might know why. Because... Nope. My hypothesis for a moment was that because the edge is happening before view is even brought onto the page, that it wouldn't have access to the... But this doesn't make sense because we're loading the component, and then the component is fetching the endpoint, which does run on the edge. So we're getting like the closest information possible. But I really surprised. Let me just make sure I didn't botch the MDM fetch function, because I thought it was just that. Like you fetch the URL, and then unless you're trying to configure things, that's basically it. So, and apparently MDN fetch is taking a while to load for some reason. Okay, yep. How to use it. Just give me an example. I just want to see an example. Fetch interfaces. Yes, please give me that. Fetch resource init. Oh, am I wrong to add a callback? Oh my God, did I do the silly thing? I think I did do the silly thing. Then, oh my gosh. I did the silly thing. I did do the silly thing. Rats! Okay, all right, this is fine. This is the joy of learning together. Okay, so not a callback function. This is a promise that then we can thenify it, and then there we go. Now this is here. Now we can see the response. But obviously the response needs, did I log the response? I haven't logged the response. Silly me. Okay, response basic, sure. And then response body, readable stream. So I think I need to parse the JSON from the body. Response.body. So I think that will not. Readable stream, yes. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna do a JSON.parse on this. I think that should work. Oop, did not like that. Response. Parse, readable stream. From response, JavaScript. Fetch API request.body. Yeah, response.body. Return response.body. Oh, silly me. Once again. All right. Copy this. Then this will return response.body directly. I keep forgetting that this is how this works. Then we take the final data that we get from it, and we can say log out the data. This is the data. Save. Hey, that was better, but still not great. Why is it not liking? Okay, real quick, dad joke. Save. Still a readable stream. Does not like it. JSON.parse data? Nope, didn't like that either. I am missing something very, very simple. Blob buffer source. I don't recall it. Response.body.json? Response.json, like that. Save. Whoop, save the wrong thing. Save that. Much better. I knew I was missing something. So H. Harlock is totally right. You want to JSONify the response. It's not so much that you're trying to access the body directly. You want to JSONify it. There we go. That's how we get everything. And we can see here, there's the joke. So theoretically, if we did data.joke now, we can see, there you go. Perfect. It's requesting as expected. So now if we go back now to hello world. This is going to break real quick. Yes, H. Harlock, thank you so much for that assist on that. I keep forgetting, like, I keep wanting to drop the JSON on different parts. And yes, it's always just response.json. That needs to be clearly memorized. Okay, save. Empty string. This still does not work. And that probably doesn't work because there is no JSON at this point. Because it's just a string. So this one's a little bit trickier now because hello world actually responds with this context. So if we compare the two with the joke, this actually makes sense. So we can learn about this. So here we can see basically that on the right, we're actually returning a context.json, and that's what's JSONifying the data so that it can be parsed. Here we're actually returning an entire HTML page. So if we really wanted to do this, like another way to do this is we would then async the request, which is not being used, and the context. And then from here, we could then say return context.json, and then saying basically hello world. Although this is just a string, so I'm skeptical of this, but it's fine. There we go. Okay, that did work. So hello world. So that's the difference, right? So earlier we were returning a full-blown HTML page that it cannot be parsed because that's not JSON. So there's that. And then to answer H. Harlock's question here, so now that we want to do this, of course, I'm doing it, I'm thenifying everything, and that's my way of saying it's a promise. So because we're in view 3, though, we can actually do this differently. So we can basically say the response is going to be response. So we can await fetch.response.json, and then actually, I wonder. Anyways, let's do that first. Then here we should be able to do that, I think. No, did I totally botch that? Setup function returns a promise. I'm botching everything, hang on. But no suspense is found in the. All right, let's explore this real quick. Okay, so I did the async response then. Actually, just for the sake, let me do something. Oh, wait. Fetch. Yep, you fetch it, then you give the response. And you log the response. Can I do that? Yeah, that was right. but it doesn't like it because the setup function is returning a promise and no suspense boundary is found. A component with async setup must be nested in suspense in order. Okay, so that means this needs to come out. So we need to grab the native suspense wrapper, although I really need to refactor this at some point. Like that. And then it did not like it. Yeah, because suspense wraps the whole thing. No suspense tree is bound in the parent component tree. I mean, there's only the app. So they're trying to say that like the async setup should probably not be done at the top level. This is a little bit trickier. Maybe what I can do then is, if they're saying that it has to be done at the parent level. Okay, so let's just revert this first. Let's show that it works. So although, oh wait, it's awaiting. Don't await. There you go, save. Okay, let's commit this real quick. Let me go back to the terminal, and we're gonna say feature add ability to fetch edge functions. Great. Okay. So yeah, so in general, async await does work, but I think what I'm running into, oddly enough, is in the script setup async await. There's something that I'm missing here. Yeah, understandably so. Whoa, why is it all in italic? That was weird. Okay, anyways. So let's see what people are asking about. Async setup works without async. Yes, await, return, sure. No, I want the script setup block. That's actually what I want. Script setup, better support. I think this is actually, I'm just curious about the original issue. Async, top level await, yep. Using a promise is the right approach. It's different from just you. Oh, is there a lag going on right now? Oh, excuse me. Let me see real quick. Uh-oh. Are we good? Test mic. Shoot. Okay, it looks like I'm okay. So it looks like still streaming from my end. Is my internet dropping in and out? All right, that's unfortunate. Can you all still hear me? Okay, Alex 40's here. Okay, looks like I'm back. Okay, perfect. Okay, good thing I'm recording all this in case basically anything drops out. So we'll make sure the recording is up later on. All right, so that's good. All right, so the question here is regarding the Sfc script setup. So let's actually just make sure we check the official docs to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep. Reactivity components, dynamic component, sure. Recursive components, namespace component, custom directives. Yes, define props, define emits, define expose. So this will expose it, compiler macro, use slots, use adders. Top level await. Okay, here we go. So you can do that, but it must be using combination, so it's still an experimental feature. Refer to its test to see how it works. Okay, so it's still in development, looks like is the short answer. So the plan is eventually to be able to allow us to just await fetch those things, and then that's it. But this means that, but I am using suspense, so that's what is bothering me a little bit. So yeah, let me just drop, actually, this is being discussed, so I'll drop this in the chat. I'm also going to drop this in the resources because someone else might want to read up on this. But, okay, so let's just say that's true. we're going to go one more level down. We're going to call it like dadjoke.view. So dadjoke.view, we'll go ahead and use the script setup block. And this time we're going to say, we're going to drop that, or actually, that's fine. Actually, don't drop that, but we're just going to paste this here. I'm going to say const response equals await fetch then do all this stuff. Then from here, then we can say const joke equals ref, and then ref of an empty string, and then we'll say my joke p element joke, like that. So then so after we get this still doesn't, this won't really fix the thing, because then you're still gonna have to await the thing, and then you're gonna have to set it later on. So this is a little bit interesting. So then ref of response. This seems, anyways, we'll just try it out. What's the worst that'll happen? Dad joke goes here. Dad joke component, just to make sure we have a clear delineation. And then from here we can do dad joke. That's that. Edge function, we're gonna close that, close that, close that. Okay. So here we go. We have this over here, which is great. Now, if we go ahead and close this, not worry about that. Yes, yes, yes. We looked at the limits. Okay. So we see dad joke component here, and if we refresh, we're noticing that nothing is happening. Okay, that makes sense actually, because inside of dad joke, we're using the top level await inside of dad joke, and it's saying that it should be wrapped in a suspense. So if I wrap this whole thing in suspense, I really should have used emmet to wrap that, but that's okay. We're just gonna run with it and save. Full reload required. We can see that it's still saying that no suspense boundary was found in the parent. Oh, silly me. I know why. Sorry, I'm saying that. Watch me be wrong. I need to wrap the component that's doing the await in suspense. Oh, whoops. Suspense. Like that. There you go. And we can see hello world's coming through. So then we can say, yeah. That joke. This is a ref of the response. And then we're not referencing hello world. We're referencing that joke. So there we go. And then joke is going to be response dot joke. And then just for, we're going to say this is I can type block quotes. Great. Block quote. Save. Aw, it didn't do any fun styling. Okay, never mind. Back to peace. Okay, to the guy who invented thanks for nothing. Ha ha ha. Okay. So basically, the reason I did that wrong is because you're not wrapping the HTML that's suspend. You're suspending the component. And so actually, I guess we'll get to dive a little bit on this. So for those wondering, so here's this suspense component. The suspense component is something built into Vue 3. It's a native component, just like you would expect to be able to write things like component is and doing a dynamic component. So suspense is a built-in component to Vue 3 to help with this very thing, which is basically saying, hey, this component is waiting for stuff before we render it. So before it's ready, just like put it in suspense. That's like kind of the idea. So if you want to do the async and top level await, particularly within the script setup, you need to make sure that it's basically within its own component so that Vue can suspend it. The reason why it doesn't work at this level, in the app.vue level, is because, well, app.vue is the component. So you cannot suspend its own, like, you get this kind of circular dependency of like, it should load but like wait for itself, and you can't do that. So this is why I needed to split it off into its own dad joke component. And then the dad joke component is what is being suspended, because that's the thing we're awaiting. Now, granted, as we can see here, there's nothing stopping us from still fetching stuff async inside of the script setup. It's just you're using the promise syntax at this point of doing .then on everything. But otherwise, if you're a huge fan of the async await syntax, in that case, just make sure you do the right thing to modularize your async await pieces, so that when it comes time to reference them in the component, you can go ahead and just wrap it inside of the suspense, and everything will work exactly as you expect. Okay, so all that said and done, we're now at a point where, yeah, this is the tricky part. Because my question here is, now that we've done this part, we've clearly gotten to the point where we're utilizing the edge functions. We're calling it, we're fetching it. So in the instance of, let's just do the last one regarding geolocation, shall we? This is, I think we'll have enough time for this one. So let's go to, sure, geolocation. Great. So all we're going to do here is inside of Edge Functions, we're going to add a new function called geolocation.js. And we're going to drop this whole thing here. And then, and then geo, I really only need the country. So let's do geo.country like that. So that way, actually, no, instead of geo2, we'll just write country. Delete all this stuff. We don't need this TypeScript stuff. So that goes bye-bye. That goes bye-bye. Save. Now that we have that, we can configure that in netlify.toml. So in one way of thinking of it at the moment, it really is helpful to think of Edge Functions as serverless functions with the ability to dominate the entire page, which can basically give you access to server-side rendering, but at the same time, there's nothing stopping it from giving you like sort of edge-level APIs that you can fetch through other means. That's not only limited to like returning a page with the said context. So in that regard, this is pretty cool because basically in the future, you might want to check that a said cookie exists before letting Vue do all of its things. And so if you might set that in advance with an Edge function, that would save you some performance. So anyways, the function we're looking for here is geolocation. And then the path here is just going to be /API/geolocation. Okay, save, excellent. Now, the thing we're gonna wanna do here, okay, we wanna actually render out the user's location. So I kinda wanna try to do this a couple ways. If we were to go to okay, so let's say we have a component and let's call it my country. So in my country, we're going to have the ability to, basically we have the my country ref. That's going to be the thing. And then inside of here, we have our fetch. So let me just grab the fetch that we had from before. And then we'll fetch the geolocation. And then log the data. Sure, let's just do that for now. Fetch, script, ref. Actually, not even worry about that right now. And then we'll have an h1 here for my country. Save. We'll use, actually, we don't have h1s. We don't have separate pages yet, so let's do that. We'll copy this, switch that out for my country. Then inside of here, let's drop it below like this. Save, refresh. So empty string, that kind of makes sense. Dad joke component. Although, why is the dad joke component not working anymore? Should still be working. Save, because I stopped it? Ooh, something is not happy. Oh yeah, because I broke something. Save, refresh. Nope, that wasn't it. Restarting. So we're loading, we loaded these three, there you go, my joke. Why the microphone? Okay, my country, great. Wonderful, now let's just change this to issue real quick. There you go, this looks a little bit better. Huh. Interesting that oh, there it is. Okay, so my country still exists. So now we can go ahead and check to see what's being logged. And this is correct. Response.json data. So I'm actually not because I can't type. There you go, now we get the country. And now the country here is United States. Okay, great. So the problem here though, is that as of right now, we're still waiting until this point to say const my country equals ref of, oh right, this is what we were talking about. Okay, right, because we're gonna flip it. We're not gonna use the async await at the moment because then this is another thing we have to wrap in suspense. So once we have the data, then rather than just log it, we'll say my country.value equals data.country. And then that would allow us to then actually run, say my country here, save. There we go, United States. Great, so we were able to fetch the location directly. And so again, to be very clear, you can totally do this with JavaScript by itself, but then part of the thing that you end up with this is I think you need to actually give the browser permission to request a user's location. That's one bit. And so that alone can block you from providing customization. And once again, particularly when it comes to like location-based content and those sort of things, if you're serving an international audience, that bandwidth can make a huge difference as far as cost to your user. So even from just that basic empathy level of like, we don't want the user to pay for data that they don't have to download. So this is where Edge Functions can be really helpful in being like, oh, you're not in the United States. Unfortunately, we only serve the content in the United States for whatever reason. Like, there you go. Done and done. Now, here's the question. So we have pages here, and we really have the ability to get these contexts and do certain things with it. So let's actually do something else too, actually. One of the things I wanted to try here was the cookies example. So Edge Functions, Netlify cookies. So Edge Functions here, here's the API. What might happen here? All right, we get this context object. All right, so what I want to do is I want to go this. If context.cookies.get, and we're going to call it like authenticated. Let's call it, yeah, authenticated, so we'll call it, is true because there should be a value. If that's true, log, well, actually, so wait, hold on. The way this should work, let me do this real quick, is we should actually set this as a variable first. So we'll say let auth cookie equals context.cookies.get. So check to see if this authenticated piece works. So if auth cookie exists, log it. Let's just make sure it exists. Otherwise, let's go ahead and do context cookies.set, set the value to true, for example. And then what we can do is, I'm gonna try this out. I'm just running with this now. If auth cookie is false or is true, we can go ahead and return the country, right? Otherwise, we will return a content that basically says country not user not authenticated, just like that. Okay, let's see if that works. So it's reloading all the edge functions, reloaded geolocation. Now, if we go inside of the application and look at the cookies, we should see nothing exists. So our expectation here is that when we refresh, we automatically get blocked and it should say not available. So if I refresh, yes, user not authenticated. Why? Because it got the cookie and it didn't work. So the only thing though is I just realized this is not going to work. That's totally fine. And that makes sense because if we look at the cookies again, it's not ever going to be authenticated because we need to set the cookie authenticated to true. Then I think this will, maybe not. Maybe I'm missing something. Context cookies dot set. Oh, I see a question here in the chat. Can we, this is from, I'm going to say advanced GG. Can we prevent VPNs? No, I don't think this will actually stop a VPN. From what I understand with the Edge function, it'll still basically try to connect your website to wherever the user is pinging from. So currently I'm in the United States. If I got a VPN and let's say I wanted to be located in Europe, so I move my VPN to Europe, I am at least 99% sure that the Edge function will not be able to say, aha, I detect you're on a VPN, you're really actually back in the US. So Edge functions will not allow you to get around that. If I find out otherwise, I will happily update or I'll basically let you all know that I was wrong. But as of right now, I would think not. That would not let us get around it. The only problem I'm a little surprised by right now is that if auth cookie is true, right? If it's get, context.get authenticated, I mean, let me do context.log auth cookie. This should just straight up be false. So if I refresh this, yeah, it's undefined. That totally makes sense. So this also means that if I log in here, else condition, we should get undefined and then the else condition. We do, we get the else condition. But the context.cookies.set is not working the way I thought it would. Is it because it is true and not just a string? That's fine. We'll test that out real quick. Request geolocation, refresh. Huh. It is getting the else condition, but the context is not setting the cookies the way I would expect it because it doesn't exist. Refresh? Nope. I wonder why this is. Because that's supposed to be what helps us do this. Using the same format. Oh, wait. It sets the same format as the options value. So it's saying I can't do it with the normal one. I mean, fine. I'll play ball. Let's say we're currently only fixing it. So the name is authenticated and the value is true. Reloaded geolocation set. Okay. Oh, that worked. I'm a little surprised that using the same format, I'm a little surprised we don't support the other standard, because if you're just talking about the cookie store set, name value should be allowed as well. Anyways, that's some feedback I will take back. I think, because otherwise I was thoroughly confused. But okay, so we can see here, basically inside of authenticated, boom, our value is true. This is great. And if we refresh, boom, there you go, location showing. This is great. So very exciting. This is cool. Yeah, gosh. There's a lot of fun things that could be done with this, honestly, because you can think now going forward, yeah, with the ability to check these things sort of on the server side before we even get started, right, before the page even loads. My question here will be now, how can we embed this experience directly inside of components? Because, so one of the things I'm thinking, oh, actually, you know what? So this is, I think this is a wrap on the live coding side. So let me switch back over to the camera. Okay, so the question here off the top of my mind from like an integration perspective is now we have this really nice standard for how we access edge functions. And clearly if we are in the sort of perspective of how to, well, let's see. If we want to replace the entire page, that's doable. We have plenty of examples to show that you can replace the entire page with this. But in a world where a lot of us live in a component-based design system where we're relying a lot on our frameworks to do that work for us, the question does become, how does this integrate into that workflow? And so clearly we found a sort of stopgap solution, which is like basically treating a bit like a serverless function in that when the page loads, we'll request certain things, and that's what will come back and determine what will happen. The only problem with this though is that we're almost losing that performance optimization at this point of having your response determine what's being outputted in advance. So what we could imagine, right, as far as a DevX flow would go, is that you'd be able to like almost in advance say, hey, check this, you know, do whatever you want with your edge function and then return the right components. But then the question is, obviously, how do those things talk to each other? And so that will probably be for another session once I've had that up and running smoothly. I know Nux 3, for example, has more native support for edge functions and how that works. So I'll certainly be taking a look at that, and you can probably expect a session on that at some point. But in the meantime, yeah, I think that's that. So as far as like a review on this session, we've gone over sort of what edge functions are, why they're important to the sort of the web architecture, modern web architecture, particularly because, again, not that it's new technology. So if you're wondering, like, hasn't this been around? Yeah, it's basically been around to some extent. And the question now is, as they becomes more accessible, how can we leverage it in the right way so that we solve the right problem? So I think my biggest thing on all this, especially for developers playing around and learning the technology, is not to be like, well, everything should be in edge functions. I think anytime we state any sort of massive absolute with those sort of things, usually I would call that a philosophy smell, because there are always trade-offs with using one thing over another, and learning about those trade-offs are ultimately what allows us as developers to grow and mature in our ability to dissect different sort of problems and apply the right solution to them, rather than having a blanket solution for everything. So With that said, it's been an absolute blast getting to hang out with everyone. Thanks everyone in the chat for their questions and just helping out, because I know at one point I was getting tripped up over the JSONify on the response. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.